Hello class, how are you doing today? I hope you are feeling great and excited about the upcoming lessons in this course. As you already know, I have recently finished grading the Guess My Number assignment. In this manner, I first really want to compliment all of you on time, effort and hard work you put in so far, because it really showed off. However, and even though the majority of the submitted solutions were correct or partially correct, I couldn't help but notice some of the common mistakes or, let's say, difficulties the most of you had with the assignment. And so, in the following minutes of this video, I will try to categorize these issues and for some of them give you the full solution and for some give you only hints and tips on how you can solve it by yourself. And remember, understanding the concepts such as rendering templates, uprooting, or generating dynamic content in HTML is crucial for your future improvement. So make sure you're watching the video carefully and of course, practice by yourself. Rendering numbers on the page. Regarding the content of the game page, what we want is to have an unordered list of numbers from 0 to 100. So in pure HTML, the code would look something like this. But of course, we don't want to write 100 lines of code, but instead we want these numbers and items to be generated automatically. And what statement do we use when we want to run a section of code repeatedly? Of course, a for loop. So instead of this, I will create only one Lee item and use Jinja2 to repeat the creation of other Lee elements. Then I'm going to use this exact same syntax as I would in Python for a for loop. So for E in numbers. And remember, we have to put this statement in the template tags so it can work properly. What I need to do next is I need to pass in this a variable as the text content of the Lee element. And for that, we need to use the double curly brace notation so Jinja2 can interpolate it. Finally, we need to end our for loop since Jinja does not recognize indentation as the end of the loop. So end for. And finally, and I'm going to leave this to you to figure it out by yourself, we need to somehow say that this numbers or variable numbers is a range of numbers from 0 to 100. And Python has a function for that. Using the URL parameter for the guess. So there are two important things to grasp in relation to this issue. First of which is creating the dynamic content by interpolating values in the template. So let's forget about the guessing my number example for a moment and focus on this basic one. What I have here is a hello HTML page that greets a user by simply saying hello and then the name. What I have to do in Python in order to make it work is, of course, to set up a root, and it will be a hello root, then to define a hello function, which will return the render template, which is, of course, the hello HTML template, and then I have to pass in the value that I want to be interpolated, which is, in this case, a name, and let's say Anna. So let's run our app. If I do the path hello, I will have the message hello Anna. So to summarize what we did here is that we created the static path to render the template containing the dynamic content. And this brings us to the second concept important for resolving the issue, which is passing dynamic content in URL using roots parameters. So let's take a moment and look at this example. What we have here is a hello name root that takes a URL placeholder called name and returns a greeting in form of good evening and then the name. So let's see it in practice. I have a root hello, and then if I add my name, the app will greet me with good evening, Nadja. Note that in the hello root, the value passed in through the URL placeholders are available as arguments to the corresponding function. Okay, so let's get back to guess my number assignment and see how can this help us generate the URL parameter for the guess. I'm starting the example with already created guess HTML with the basic HTML syntax and with the game HTML that we saw in the previous task. So the first thing we have to do is to create a link to each number in the list. And of course, for this, we're going to use the anchor tag with the href attribute. So the value of the href attribute should be, as already said in the assignment instruction, the guess slash and then the number. So what we are doing here is using this for loop to generate the dynamic content that will interpolate this value here and pass it into the URL. So let's see how this works in practice. I will refresh, click the play game, and then guess a number. Of course, we get the message not found because we still haven't rendered the guess HTML, but what we can see is that we got the link right. So we click number 5 and the URL is guess slash number 5. Now we need to figure out how to render the guess HTML each time a user guesses the number. We already know that a static part of the root is guess, so we're going to go with that. Then we need a guess function that will return the template guess HTML. What is left is to define the dynamic part of the path, or in other words, figure out how to pass the dynamic variable. And as we already saw in the hello user example, in order to pass the dynamic variable, in the root we need to have a placeholder. And I will call it something like n, referring to a number. So now the value that we have passed in here through the placeholder is basically the exact same value that we have here, which is the text content of the Lee item that the user has clicked. And finally, we need to pass this value that is held in the placeholder as the parameter of this guess function in order to render the guess template. And now let's see this in action. Play game, let's say number 10, and here it is. We have the URL guess slash number 10 and the render guess HTML page. And now what we want to do is to go into guess HTML file and try to show the number that the user has clicked. I hope this is quite easy for you now, since we already have this number as an argument in the guess function. So all we need to do is say your guess is, let's say, user guess, and define in function that user guess is equal to n. But remember, we have one more trick here to do, which is to parse this string int, or let's say character int, into number. So we will use the int Python function for that. And let's test it all. Here, play game, let's say 18, and we have that our guess is number 18. Handling the guess logic. One of the biggest challenges in being a programmer is creating the structure of the program based on client's request, or in other words, translating client's word in programmer's code. So let's put the guessing game assignment to a client programmer situation. So this is Mark, and he wants you to create a game in which users try to guess the number from 1 to 100. What this means is that the program should generate a secret number. The game starts on home page. This requires an index HTML page with a link or a button that will start the game. Users can guess a number by clicking on the number they want. The fact that users can choose the number means they all have to be listed and also linked, since Mark said numbers are clickable. Finally, the game should say if the user guess is higher, lower, or same as the program's. For the code, this means that the links redirect the user to results page, in which the result has to be compared with user guess. So now, when we understand what the program should do, let's give you some hints on how to implement it. So, there are three main parts of the program: the Python app, the game HTML, and the guess HTML. And let's dive in the flow of the code. So first, the program should generate a random number from 1 to 100. And for this, you can use the random int function. Then, in the game HTML, a list of Lee items with the number and the link get automatically generated thanks to the for loop. Then, the app should be able to render the game HTML template with the numbers. In the next step, the program should render the guess HTML template, which will need the user guess number and the secret number to work properly. The secret number and the user guess gets compared in the game HTML, and based on the outcome, the corresponding message and link to the next action is shown. Using the automated test. In the assignment, you were given an automated test to check 4 functionalities of your code. The first function, the test index link, checks whether the index HTML is rendered with the link that contains the word game. The second case aims to check whether numbers from 0 to 100 are listed, concretely if numbers 1, 10, 45 and 82 are rendered on the page. The last 2 functions test if the results on the guess page contains the words low, that is high, the word high. So now, if we want to see this in action, what we can do is, of course, run the application. And we will see in the control bar that the 4 tests are run and that everything is okay. So let's now make an intentional error to see what happens when the code is not working correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the link from game to game 2 here in the index HTML page. And then I'm going to run the app again. And now I get a message that one of my tests failed. That the 4 are run, but 1 failed. And here in message, you can see that assert b ref game in response is not the same. So this is the line that is not working, and assert means check if something is true. So the error is here because it's not true that there is a link called game, because what we did, we rendered the link with the name game and then number 2. What we can do now is try to create another test function, and this is going to be a very basic example, is to test whether the guess HTML has the link to get back on the game page. So whether it says that there is an option for users to guess again. So we will say that this test weights 1 point for you, and then define the test function. And remember, in the testing application, each function should start with the keyword test. So I will call it test links. And I will need to receive the data from the guess page, and I'm going to call it guess. So I have to connect to the guess page. And we will do the check for the page number 45, or when the guess, the user clicks on the link 45. And then we're going to assert or check whether it's true that the word guess, or guess again as you like, appears in the data, or we can check also with the capital cases, just in case, appears in the data of the guess page, which we took here. And I'm going to run the test. So stand. We now have 5 tests that are rendered. This is, of course, failed, because this is the one that failed with the index HTML. So we can maybe get this back on track and run it again. And see that we now have 5 tests, and each 5 are working. So all of our functionalities are working as expected. Working around the bonus task. Static files are files which content is hard-coded on a page. This means the static files don't change when the app is running. In a typical web application, your most common static files will be CSS, JavaScript, and images. The most common reason to use static files is to avoid incorrect file structure on changes in the relative paths. To handle the static file, we need a static folder, and then we can use relative paths to reference the static files. To reference the static file, we use the URL for function, in which we pass in the name of the directory, which is usually named static, and the name of the static file in a keyword argument file name. So let's see how can we add a favicon icon by passing its location using the URL. So I already prepared some stuff that we will need for this example, and those are the static folder in the root, and inside I have placed the favicon icon. If you want, you can add another folder in the static folder, for example, images or EMG, and then put the favicon inside. So what I want to do now is to add a link tag, which is used to link the external resources, and then the rel attribute to define the type of the resource I'm passing in, which is icon. Finally, I would need the href attribute for passing the link. So if this was something like pure HTML, the path would be static and then favicon icon. But since I have the URL for function in Jinja2 engine, I can use the curly braces and say URL for, and then name the name of the static folder that my file is in, which is the static, and use the file name argument to pass the value of my file, which is favicon icon. And that's it. Let's try this now. And you can see the favicon in its place. Of course, we need to copy-paste this code in each template that we are using, or HTML that we are entering, in order to be available in all of the website or the web application. What you can do next is try to link the style sheet or some CSS file by creating the CSS folder and inside some CSS style sheet file, and then use the URL for function to link the static file in the same way I did for the favicon icon. In this final task, what I want to do is to try using a form instead of just links for the number guessing game. So what I had in mind is to enter my guess number in the input number field, and then by clicking the submit button, the program will, in the exact same way as before, check if my guess is higher, lower, or exactly the same as the program's number. You should note here that this example will be done in the new game HTML file, in which we have a regular form made with the HTML. So we have a for tag, a label for the input field that we called user number, and the type is number, and a submit button. And what we want to do here is to redirect user to the guess page whenever he hits the submit button. And we can do that by simply saying that the action is /guess. Now, our final task is to pass the number that the user entered in the game HTML to the guess function. So it can be used in guess HTML. And what we're actually doing is that we are requesting the data from the form. So what we need is to first import the request object so that the Flask can recover the data. The data received on the server should be obtained through the get method, as defined here. And in order to get the value of the user input, we could say something like this. Input is equal to request.args.get, and then say user input. The args attribute is actually a dictionary that contains arguments from the URL. And what we are passing in the URL from here is something like this. User input equal, for example, 15. So this would be the part of the URL. And the args get it. So the get part method is also a built-in method that will get an item from a dictionary, which is the value 15, for example, in this case. So now we need to pass in this in the render template function. But what we also need to do is to define the variable that will be passed to the guess HTML. And also, since this will be returned as a character, we need to parse it with the function int as an input. So now we have the user guess, which will be used here in the guess HTML as a user guess, and we only are left with defining this secret, which is actually just this secret number that is defined here. So we have to say secret is equal to secret number. And now let's see this in action. Let's say 17, check my guess, and the program is working. And that was all. I really hope that the provided feedback will help you not only resolve the guessing number assignment, but the most importantly, help you understand how the basic concepts of Flask and Python can help you build modern web applications.